There is no secret that Ohio State has been the dominating and commanding power in the Big Ten since the early to mid 2000s, especially ever since Tressel's national title in 2002. The Buckeyes have been steamrolling the Big Ten Conference. There's no secret to it. Jim Tressel, Urban Meyer, the best coaches in their conference, or certainly close to being the best coaches, depending on who you ask. Absolutely dominant. If you count out that 2011, the weird 6 and 7 year under interim Luke Fickell, who at the time was not nearly as good of a head coach as he is now, then Ohio State has been the best team, or one of the best teams in the Big Ten every year since Tressel's second year. So it's been a phenomenal ride for Ohio State. The fans, as a result, like any fan base that does traditionally well or has done well recently, the expectations have risen. Ohio State wants to be a team that gets in the playoff every year, that wins their conference every year. And they were doing that, not the playoff part, but they reached the playoff in 2016 despite not winning their conference. In 2017, they, of course, won their conference but had 2 losses, so they missed the playoff. 2018, they went 13-1 with only 1 loss, but they missed the playoff. 2019, they won their conference. Same with 2018, reached the playoff, lost in a controversial way. Might be one of the greatest Buckeye teams of all time, that 2019 squad was. In 2020, they win the conference again in a weird COVID year, dominating most of their games. They crushed Clemson in the playoff, avenging their 2019 loss, reached the national title, and lost to Alabama. And you can't forget Urban Meyer's earlier seasons where they went undefeated in 2012, 12-2, but undefeated in the regular season in 2013, won the national title with a 14-1 record in 2014, and in 2015 went 12-1. Their one loss was by 3 points at home to Big Ten champion Michigan State. You know how the story goes. And in that time frame, they've been relatively dominant against Michigan. Again, outside of that 2011 season and the 2003 season, if we're counting from the beginning of the Tressel era until now, Ohio State had never lost to Michigan, except those 2 times. Well, this past season, that changed. And it was noticeable at the end of the year how much it affected not only Ohio State fans, but the coaches, the players, etc. And let me explain. So at the beginning of 2021, Oregon happens. Minnesota, you saw the cracks. You saw that, and I said this in a video, and not a lot of people liked it, but in reaction to the Minnesota game, I said, Minnesota just ran all over you. And I definitely underestimated Oregon's offensive capabilities, but I said, looking at that Minnesota game, like the defensive line had issues. And the front, or at least the front 7, had issues. And it obviously did. The front 7 was just destroyed. It was torn to shreds like a bear tearing apart a rabbit in Columbus. That was what the Oregon-Ohio State game was. And Ohio State, at the end of the day, they had a chance to come back and win, but C.J. Stroud was still young. The offense and some of the, I would say, stubborn play calling that you saw in 2021 also killed them. Ryan Day going for it, I think, 5 times on 4th down. 1 resulted in a touchdown. I think another was converted, but I think 3 or maybe 4 of those 4th down attempts were incomplete. Incomplete passes or complete failures, which continued to feed Oregon's momentum. But then after that, Ohio State, they rested Stroud during the Akron game after a struggle against Tulsa. And the injury was obviously hurting him, and he needed that time mentally and physically to rest, repair himself, and Ohio State began peaking, crushing Rutgers, crushing Maryland, crushing Indiana. I don't know exactly the order of some of these games, but, and then you saw that they still weren't the perfect team, struggling against Penn State. That Nebraska game, if Nebraska had a kicker, they might have beaten you. That Nebraska game was the game where I, honestly, as a Michigan fan, should have saw that Michigan was going to win. Because Nebraska, 3-9 team, they played Michigan tough, but they're noticeably worse than Michigan. They were noticeably worse than Michigan outside of their game versus Michigan. And that was really the toughest road opponent Ohio State had played the entire year. It was Minnesota or Nebraska. It was the closest road game that Ohio State played was Nebraska. And they did not fare well. But my own doubts, because as a Michigan fan, I hadn't seen the win in so long, I just couldn't process it. I could not process us beating you, even though I heard from one of my favorite analysts, Mike Valenti, give several reasons as to why Michigan was going to win. He even bet money that Michigan was going to win. And I mean, he knows his stuff, but I just couldn't process it. And then it happened. It happened, and Michigan was ecstatic, but you could see on the sidelines, and I know this is taking a long time. It's kind of a long introduction, but it's important. It's important because it sets the tone for 2022 and what 2022 means for Ohio State. The Ohio State fans, you could see it when they were at Michigan Stadium, the few of them that were there, and you could see it in the players, and I think you could even see it in the coaches, just the way Ryan Day called the game when Trevion Henderson ran 3 times up the middle. Ohio State couldn't process that Michigan was beating them. Michigan played well. They got in Ohio State's heads because Ohio State couldn't process that they could lose to Michigan. It had been so long. That's not to say they didn't try their hardest. Ohio State always tries their hardest against Michigan. There's no secret to that. It's like with Michigan State. Michigan has 2 really good rivals who are competitive and who want to axe Michigan to death. There is no secret about that. And Michigan was out-toughed, out-coached, outplayed against Michigan State. There's no secret to that. But then they returned the favor against Ohio State. And even though Ohio State tried their best on the field, their offense played a phenomenal game. C.J. Stroud threw for 400 yards. Their best was not good enough to beat Michigan's best. And that was clear by the end of the day and clear by the end of the year that was Michigan's best game. If Michigan played like that against, let's say, Georgia or Michigan State, if they played like that the entire year, which a team like Alabama and a team like Georgia have done, it's very hard for everyone to play their best game for most games of the year. If Michigan played like that every game of the year, they might have reached the national title game or done something more phenomenal. But that win was huge for Michigan, and it was also huge for Ohio State. And let me explain why. Do you think that Ryan Day would have canned everyone on his defensive staff, including the O-line coach, if you didn't lose to Michigan? Now, I think some guys would have been fired. I think that Kerry Combs, the minute he was relieved of play calling duties, was either going to be moved to cornerbacks coach or fired. He was not going to be defensive coordinator next year. But that loss to Michigan totally caused a lot of that coaching staff changed. And it stung. It stung until probably, and it still stings today, but you could tell that it affected them in the Rose Bowl. It affected them very negatively in that first quarter. That first quarter was lethargic. Ohio State was not motivated. They were not playing right. And that's why Utah established such a big lead, because Utah was one of the hottest teams in the country. They have a good mentality, a strong culture, and they were burrowing through Ohio State. But then Ohio State got motivated. The motivation factor turned on, and they won the Rose Bowl, and that was a powerful win, and that sets the tone for 2022. Ohio State is motivated by the loss to Michigan, the lack of going to Indy, and the loss to Oregon. They're motivated by their 2 losses and the fact they missed out on their first Big Ten title in the Ryan Day era. They didn't even play for one this past season, and they missed out on their first Big Ten title since 2016. Ohio State also lost to their first Big Ten East opponent in 2021 since 2016 at Penn State. That's how dominant Ohio State is in their own division, in their own conference. So they're not used to losing. They don't like losing, and no fan base does, but they hate losing so much that their expectations now with the staff they've hired, with what they're returning, are through the roof. The expectations for Ohio State, I think, is close to winning it all. I don't know if it's exactly winning it all, because expecting a team to go 15-0 or the season's a failure is pretty extreme. I don't think that's the mindset. But Ohio State at least is aiming to win it all. That is their goal. And they have, I think, another whole subset of goals. Their baseline standard is winning the Big Ten. You check that box for Ohio State. It's good, but you want to see more. It's like getting an above passing grade, like a C plus, a B minus, or a B. It's good. It's going to get you by, but you want to see more. And that's because they're so used to it. Winning the Big Ten 4 times in a row is pretty crazy. And then it's crazy to think that under Urban Meyer, I think they only won 3 Big Ten championships. Ryan Day's already won 2. They've just been so dominant in conference, so dominant in their division that baseline standard is at least getting to Indy and then winning in Indy, which winning in Indy should almost be more expected. Like if you get there and if you get to Indy, winning it if you're an East Division team is a must, because the East has never lost to the West, and the West has yet to field a team that honestly is worthy of winning Indy. And it's depressing, but I think at some point the West is going to rise up and at least have an upset game. Don't know when that's going to be, but until that happens, and even after that happens, just the talent disparity, the fact that Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, those 3 teams have more talent than any team in the West does. Any team, at least coming out of high school. Michigan State might join Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State soon with the way they've been recruiting. Maryland is close too as well, despite their horrendous records over the past few seasons. So the East has a huge talent disparity. Their schools have more money, more resources. 2 blue bloods are in, 3. Forgot about Penn State, shouldn't have done that. 3 teams that are blue blood or near blue blood level are in the East. Michigan State's also a solid program. So the East winning the Big Ten is a must. So if Ohio State goes undefeated, which is, I think, close to an expectation of theirs this year, and gets to Indy, the expectation is win Indy. And even though reaching the football playoff is hard, it is a challenge. Even if you get, for example, like in 2018, even in 2018, they went 12-1, won their conference, but they missed it because of other teams like Clemson and Alabama having undefeated regular seasons, Oklahoma having a better loss, and Notre Dame having an undefeated season. The second you lose one game, not everything's in your control. Not everything's in your control the second you lose one game, unless everyone else has a loss except for maybe 1 or 2 teams. Everything is only in your control for reaching the playoff if you're in the Power 5, if you go undefeated. It is hard to reach the playoff, let alone win it. But I think Ohio State wants to win at least a game. I think that this season, just reaching there and getting beaten, especially if it's not a competitive game, will be viewed as a disappointment. With the talent that is assembled, with the upgrading coaching staff, this is just my feel of what I see. I see in comment sections, whether it's my own or on Buckeye fan pages on Instagram or Ohio State football, that the expectation is to go deep. Like, not just win your conference, but to at least reach the national title game, to play in Los Angeles, and to play for a national title. Now, whether you win or lose there, different story. It's even harder to win a national title. It is so hard to win with the likes of Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, doing what they do. And occasionally a random SEC team that comes out of the middle of nowhere, makes a run, and then goes away, like 2019 LSU. It is so challenging. Ohio State, in fact, is the only team north of the Mason-Dixon line, the only team that's north of California and the South to, I think, even win a playoff game. Notre Dame hasn't, Michigan State hasn't, Michigan hasn't, Ohio State's won a national title, and they've played for another. It's just how dominant the South is. So it's very challenging to win a national title, but I think the expectation for Ohio State is to at least go 1-1 in that college football playoff. And the final point, this one's very important. Losing to Michigan again will make the season there's always exceptions, but it will basically make the entire season a disaster. Of course, if Ohio State goes 14-1, wins the national title, with their only loss being to Michigan, like a really good Michigan team, that might be different, because I would rather win a national title and lose to one of my biggest rivals, because a national title is just that big. But losing to Michigan and not winning something huge after that is a complete disappointment. It's absolute failure for Ohio State fans. It's the same thing with my Michigan Wolverines for most seasons, and I would even say this season. Now, I'd be pleased as a Michigan Wolverine with an 11-1 season with a loss to Ohio State and winning a New Year's Six Bowl. I would be pleased with that, but it would still be a failure. It would still be something that Michigan needs to correct if they lost to Ohio State. Not saying that I would just hate the season, hate the team, immediately get down on them, but it would be disappointing because it's a rivalry, and I expect my team when they're good to do good things. And I expect my coach, now that he finally broke through, to continue the trend instead of having this as a one-off. For Ohio State, they just expect to beat Michigan. Like I said earlier in this video, their fans and players couldn't process when they lost to them. This past season, they couldn't. And you see that in comment sections too. You see fans saying, oh, we're going to beat Michigan by 40 again. We're going to beat them by multiple TDs. We're going to do to them what we did in 2018 or 2019, but worse. It's foreign to them. And all it's doing is it's going to fuel this Ohio State team to play its best, to win every game. They don't want to enter the Michigan game or any game with a blemished record. They don't. And I don't think they will. I've said it previously. I think this team is going 15-0 and winning it all. And if they don't, then oh well, I was wrong. I at least think they will be good and reach the playoff. Their schedule is completely in their favor. All of their toughest games they host, like Michigan, their toughest game, I think they host. Notre Dame, who is either their second or third toughest game, they host them. Wisconsin and Iowa, who are going to be their solid fundamental teams, so they might play closer to Ohio State than OSU fans want them to. They might cause a scare or two. They play in Columbus. At Penn State is probably their second or third toughest game. Depends on how good Penn State is, how motivated they are, and such. At Penn State's going to be a tough game. At Michigan State, I think Michigan State's going to be good. But out of all the games I mentioned, they would be in last place just because they have matchup issues. Their O-line is suffering through attrition, and Ohio State's D-line is going to have like a fantastic pass rush, and they're going to get better fundamental-wise with being able to run block and shed blocks, which they struggled with this past season against competent O-lines. And Ohio State is a really good wide receiver core, a really good passing game. They have running backs who can catch the ball out of the backfield and explode in open space. They have a powerful run game. And Michigan State can only defend the run. Until proven otherwise, I'm not going to say they're going to be able to stop Ohio State's pass game or even limit it. Their secondary will improve. Same with many of these other teams improving at certain points, in my opinion. But it's not going to be enough. And then with Michigan game, I think that Michigan's offense will be better than this past season, but they won't have that pass rush to constantly make Stroud feel uncomfortable. That game, I would not be surprised if it was as close as the 2016 game, but instead of a defensive battle, it would be an absolute shootout. That would not shock me at all, but I just don't think Michigan has the overall defense to stop Ohio State. Their run defense might slightly improve. It's not going to be anything elite or great, though, with the loss of production they have. And their pass rush is certainly going to take a step back. Even if their run defense improves, the pass rush taking a step back will certainly bring the whole defense down, I think at least. Ohio State's schedule just is set up very well for them to have that undefeated regular season. It's set up for them to secure the number 1 or number 2 seed in the playoff. And I think that that's the expectation, to go undefeated, or at least to have just one loss, if that's just the lowest expectation you can go, just to win the Big Ten with a 12-1, or much more preferably a 13-0 record, and get to play for a national title. I think that's the expectation surrounding Ohio State football. And that's this video. I think that Ohio State fans, they want this team to succeed. They bleed for this team to beat Michigan again, win the Big Ten again. And I think it's the same sentiment in that locker room. I saw a quote from Ryan Day that someone posted, and it was something to the effect of, our goal is just to take one game at a time, but win every game. Every game we play for, we win. And if Ohio State follows through on his quote and what his mindset is, then Ryan Day might have himself his first national title and Ohio State's third national title since the year 2000. If you enjoyed this video, if you think that I analyzed Ohio State's expectations pretty correctly, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on Ohio State's expectations, what you think about this team, and what your prediction is for them down below. My prediction is their defense will improve just enough to where it'll get critical stops, and their offense will still be that number 1 offense in the nation. I don't know if they'll be as great as, let's say, a 2019 LSU. I'm not going to predict that until it happens, just because of how good that offense was. Same with, let's say, a 2020 Alabama. But it's going to be a similar situation where the offense is dominant, but the defense, despite still needing improvements and not being an elite unit, is going to be good and great enough. They're going to certainly improve in fundamentals to where it will help their offense. It'll just help the offense dominate. It'll help the team dominate. They'll be a clutch defense. Not an elite one, but a great clutch defense that will allow the offense to sometimes make mistakes and take some pressure off of them, which is very important. Again, thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.